The year was 1883, and Black Hollow sat buried beneath winter and silence. A mining town built into the bones of the hills, where the days were black with soot and the nights white with frost. Wind scraped across the rooftops like it was searching for something it had lost. They said the town was small, but it carried grief large enough to echo. At the edge of it lived a man named Jonas Whitlock, a miner, a widower, a ghost who walked. He wasn't always that way. Once, he was a husband to Eliza, who laughed when she read, and a father to a boy named Caleb, who used to chase fireflies with sticky fingers and wide eyes. Then the fever took Eliza, quickly, cruelly, and a fire stole the orphanage where Caleb had been sent for safekeeping. The county sent a letter, presumed dead, 2 words that left nothing to bury, and too much to remember. Jonas stopped speaking after that. To the town, to himself. Each morning, he rose in the dark, ate cold bread, stepped into the mine like a man begging the mountain to finish what it started. Each night, he came home to a cottage that smelled like stone and wood ash. There was still a small rocking horse under the bed, carved from oak, worn smooth where tiny hands once gripped. He never moved it. On certain nights, when the wind turned sharp, he'd sit in the dark and think he heard Caleb's laugh down the chimney. Just for a moment, just enough to hurt. That night, the one when everything began to change, Jonas left the mill saloon with dried blood on his knuckles. Someone had said the wrong name, or the right one, at the wrong time. He muttered into the wind as he walked. "Ain't your place to look at me that way," he said. The moon was low and mean. Snow crunched under his boots. When he reached the cottage, he stepped inside without lighting the lamp. Darkness welcomed him like an old friend. Then came the knock. 3 times. Not loud, not desperate. He ignored it. Then a voice followed. "Jonas, it's Reverend Breyer. I wouldn't come if I had anywhere else to take her." Jonas opened the door. The Reverend stood wrapped in his coat, dusted with snow, and beside him, a woman. She looked worn by the road, her coat thin, her eyes steady, and her gloved hands white around the handle of a small leather satchel. "This is Miss Evelyn Moore," the Reverend said. "She came on the morning train. Her purse was stolen between stops. She's got nowhere to sleep, and the boarding house turned her out. My sister's family is still in from out east. Right. You brought her here," Jonas said flatly. The Reverend nodded. "Because you understand loss, and because she doesn't deserve the cold." Jonas looked at Evelyn. She didn't flinch, didn't beg. She simply said, "I can sleep near the fire. I won't be in your way." Jonas stood still a moment longer, then stepped aside. "Fire's out," he muttered. "Wood's stacked in the corner." She nodded once. "Thank you." Evelyn stepped inside without a sound. She knelt by the hearth, laid the wood with practiced hands, and struck a match. Soon, warmth stretched its arms across the floor. She didn't speak again, didn't unpack more than a book and a blanket. Jonas sat in his chair and watched the flames curl. She read quietly, lips moving but making no sound, and for the first time in 3 years, there were 2 people breathing under that roof. Not lovers, not family, just 2 souls, waiting to thaw. Morning slid into the room like smoke, slow, quiet, and unsure whether it should stay. The fire Evelyn lit still smoldered, and the cold hadn't crept in as far as it usually did. Jonas woke stiff in his chair, the ache in his back sharp, the warmth on his lap unmistakable. A blanket. He didn't remember covering himself. From the kitchen came the sound of a pot shifting, then the smell of coffee, real coffee, strong and earthy. He stood and found her there, Evelyn, already moving like she belonged in the space. Her sleeves were rolled, and she poured dark liquid into a tin cup with care. "I found the beans by the stove," she said without turning. "Hope you don't mind." Jonas grunted, accepted the cup, and took a long sip. It was better than anything he'd had in years. They sat in silence. Not the kind that asked for words. The kind that let them both stay untouched a little longer. Later that morning, Jonas left for the mine. His steps were slower, heavier, not from the cold, but from the quiet she left in his mind. At work, the air hung thick with coal dust and questions. The men didn't say much, but he could feel their glances. By the time he came home, the house was swept, his boots were cleaned, and his coat hung straight. Supper was warm, bread rising by the hearth. She didn't say anything when he stepped through the door, just nodded, then returned to stitching a tear in his sleeve. He watched her for a moment. "Don't have to do that," he said. "I know," she replied. That night, the Reverend came by again, his hat in his hands, his words clumsy. "My sister's family is still under our roof," he said, "and I haven't heard from the school in Brooksville. No position for Miss Moore yet. And, well, the boarding house still won't take her." Jonas said nothing. Reverend Breyer looked toward the fire, then said what Jonas had already heard in the mine. "People are starting to talk." Jonas nodded once. That was all. Later, Evelyn sat by the table, sewing quietly. When he entered, she didn't look up. Instead, she said, "We should talk." He stopped mid-step. "I know this isn't what either of us asked for," she said, keeping her voice even, "but I'm a woman with no wages and no name in a place that doesn't take kindly to that." She set down the cloth and met his eyes. "I'm not asking for charity. I'm proposing an arrangement." Jonas said nothing. "A marriage. Legal. Simple. No expectations beyond that. You'd have a house kept. I'd have a roof. It'll settle the whispers." She waited. Jonas sat down in the chair across from her, stared at the fire, and then, after a long moment, he said, "We'll see the Reverend in the morning." Evelyn nodded once. No smile. No relief. Just acceptance. And that silence between them? It shifted. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It was the quiet breath before the storm. They married the next day. No music. No rings of flowers. Just winter light filtering through lace curtains and the crackle of fire in the Reverend's parlor. Jonas stood straight in a coat that no longer fit his frame. His hands were clean, but the coal stains never left completely. Evelyn wore the same gray dress from the night she arrived, ironed, buttoned all the way to the collar, sleeves neatly cuffed. She reached out and fixed the fold in his lapel. "That'll do," she murmured. Reverend Breyer's voice filled the silence with scripture. Soft, solemn, respectful. He read the vows with the cadence of someone who knew both parties didn't expect much more than the legality. Jonas answered first. "Yes." Then Evelyn. "I do." There were no smiles, no tremble of hands. When the Reverend asked about the ring, Jonas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. It had belonged to his mother. He took Evelyn's left hand and slipped it on gently. Her fingers didn't shake, but she blinked twice before letting go. And just like that, they were husband and wife. The Reverend closed his book with a nod. His wife offered them warm cider, which neither of them touched. They walked home slowly, boots cracking through ice, shoulders nearly brushing but not quite. People watched from their porches, from behind curtains, through fogged glass. Some nodded, some whispered. Evelyn said quietly, "It'll pass. They'll find someone else to stare at." Jonas replied, "They always do." When they returned to the cottage, Jonas opened the door for her. Evelyn stepped inside, looked around as though the house had shifted somehow. She didn't speak. He removed his coat. She did the same. They didn't talk of the vows. They didn't touch. That night, she slept in the back bedroom, the one with the crooked window that looked out at the trees. Jonas stayed in the front, near the fire. Morning came with fresh snow and a second cup beside his own. It continued like that, quiet, respectful, routine. She cooked. He chopped wood. She mended a curtain. He fixed a loose floorboard without being asked. One night, she left a book open on the table. A story about a boy who wandered and a father who waited. He didn't say a word, but he didn't move the book either. In time, the silence between them no longer felt like absence. It felt like space, being made for something new. February rolled in like a ghost, quiet and heavy. The cold settled into the bones of the town and the walls of the cottage. It made everything brittle. The windows, the trees, even the people. The mines groaned under the pressure of freeze and thaw, and so did the men who worked them. Jonas pushed himself harder than most. Longer hours, fewer words. Evelyn noticed. She saw how he sat longer before putting on his boots, how he winced when he lifted the coal bucket, how his right hand trembled just slightly when he thought she wasn't looking. She asked one night, while clearing the table. "Are you hurt?" He didn't look up. "Just tired," he said. Evelyn didn't press, but the way she folded the cloth was slower than usual. The next week, it happened. One moment, the shaft was solid. The next, a thunder like the mountain cracking in half. Jonas didn't remember much after the collapse. Just the sound of wood snapping, stones sliding, someone screaming. Maybe him. When they pulled him out, he wasn't awake. His ribs were broken, his shoulder dislocated, a gash above his brow crusted over with dried blood. The foreman sent word. Reverend Breyer helped carry him home. Evelyn opened the door before they knocked. She didn't cry. She made space on the bed, took the cloths they offered, lit the stove until the house pulsed with heat. The doctor came, said Jonas would live, if he wanted to. After he left, Evelyn sat by the bed, hands folded. Jonas drifted in and out, fevered and murmuring. Sometimes he called out names. Once, he whispered, "Eliza." Evelyn closed her eyes, then opened them again. "I'm still here," she said softly. "You're not alone." Days passed. She fed him by spoon, changed his bandages, sponged sweat from his forehead. When his eyes finally stayed open long enough to speak, he looked at her and rasped. "You stayed." She nodded. "Where else would I go?" He studied her, really studied her, then said, "You could have walked away." "I could have," she agreed. "But you didn't." "No," she said. "I didn't." Later that week, as he sat propped near the fire, she laid the carved horse in his lap, the one Caleb once loved. He held it for a long time, and though he didn't say a word, she saw it, in the tightness of his jaw, the soft tremble in his hand. Grief was still there, but so was something else. Something starting. Jonas healed slowly, the kind of slow that reminds a man how fragile he really is. He could stand by the third week, walk with a limp by the fourth, but there were things that stayed broken longer than bones. He hated needing help, but Evelyn gave it without pity. Quiet hands, steady voice, always a step away when he faltered, never closer than he needed, never farther than he could reach. One evening, she helped him into the chair by the fire. As she placed the blanket over his legs, he caught her wrist gently. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She looked at him. "I know," she replied, and he let go. The days found a rhythm. She read aloud in the evenings, passages from old novels, short stories from magazines. A neighbor had left. Her voice filled the cottage like a song that didn't need music. One night, she read a line aloud. "Some fires burn fast. Others stay just long enough to keep you from freezing." He didn't say anything, but when she closed the book, she found him still watching her. Sometimes he spoke about Caleb. Not much, just bits. The way he laughed when he rode the horse Jonas carved. How he loved sweet bread. How he hated thunder. And Evelyn. She listened, because she already knew the truth. She had known it for weeks. The letter from Harrisburg had come on a Thursday, folded neat and official. A boy, around 10, found wandering. Birthmark behind the right ear. The name lost. But he'd wake screaming for someone named Jonas. She'd meant to tell him. She'd written the orphanage under a false name, just to ask, just to see. And when they wrote back with the details, when she realized the boy could be Caleb, she told herself she needed to be sure first, to protect him from false hope. But night after night, as she sat beside him, her resolve began to rot beneath her guilt. Once, she pulled the letter from her drawer, held it by the fire. She nearly burned it, but she didn't. Instead, she hid it back in the seam of her satchel, pressed flat under the lining like a secret too heavy for truth. And when Jonas said softly, "Sometimes I think he's still out there," she looked at the fire and whispered, "Sometimes I think you're right." But she didn't say more. Not yet. It was a quiet morning when it all came out. The kind of morning where the frost on the windows looked like lace and the fire in the hearth didn't crackle. It whispered. Evelyn had been staring at the same page in a book for 10 minutes. She hadn't read a word. Jonas sat at the table, his hands steady again, his shoulder finally holding weight. He was carving something, a new handle for a shovel. Maybe. But his mind was elsewhere. They both were. She stood, walked to the small drawer near her room, and pulled out the letter. Her fingers shook as she held it. "Jonas," she said. He looked up slowly. "There's something I should have told you weeks ago," she said. "And I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to hear it." She set the letter down in front of him. The seal was already broken. "I wrote to an orphanage in Harrisburg. Before the mine collapsed. Before anything changed." He said nothing. "I asked about your son," she continued. "I didn't use your name. I just gave them details, his age, the birthmark. I wasn't expecting anything." Jonas's eyes were locked on the envelope. His knuckles whitened around the wooden handle. He wrote back. "A couple took in a boy after the Westmoreland fire. He doesn't remember his name, but he has the mark, crescent-shaped, behind the right ear." Jonas's breath caught. "You knew," he said. His voice was rough, cold. "I did," Evelyn said, voice shaking. "But I was afraid of giving you false hope, of breaking you again." He stood slowly. The chair creaked back. "You should have told me." "I know." "Why now?" "Because if there's even a chance that boy is Caleb," she said, "you deserve to find him." Jonas looked at the letter again, then at her, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't look angry. He looked lost. He pressed a hand to the table to steady himself. "Where is he now?" "Outside of Willowbend," she said. "Ohio. A farm." He nodded once. "Then we leave tomorrow." Evelyn blinked. "Just like that?" "Just like that," he said. "If there's a chance, any chance, that he's mine." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. She stepped forward. "I'll come with you." He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. They packed lightly that evening. No ceremony, no words for what was unfolding, but something had shifted between them. Not broken, melted. The road to Willowbend cut through hills and silence. They traveled by wagon, through slush and thawing woods. The skies stayed gray, but not angry, just tired. Like everything else, Jonas didn't speak much. Evelyn sat beside him, glancing at the map, then at him. His grip on the reins was steady, but his eyes never left the road ahead. 3 days later, they reached the farm. A modest place, weather-worn, but alive. A dog barked once and stopped. Smoke curled from the chimney like it belonged there. A boy was out front, splitting wood. He was thin, barefoot, too small for the axe he held, but he swung it cleanly. Jonas stopped the wagon and just stared. Evelyn touched his arm gently. "That's him, isn't it?" "I don't know," he whispered, "but I feel it." They climbed down. Jonas stayed back as Evelyn approached the door. The woman answered. Her hair was streaked with silver, her eyes lined with age and kindness. Evelyn explained who they were, what they were searching for. She didn't mention the fire. Didn't need to. The woman stepped aside. "He goes by Will now. Found him near the train tracks outside Harrisburg, 2 winters ago. No memory, no name. Nightmares, though. And a mark." Evelyn looked back at Jonas. He walked slowly toward the boy. The axe paused mid-swing. "Hey," Jonas said. The boy turned. Jonas crouched down in front of him, his voice barely above a whisper. "I used to carve horses just like that one on your belt." The boy's eyes flicked down, then back up. "I like carving," he said. "Don't know where I learned it." Jonas nodded slowly, then reached up and tucked a curl of hair behind the boy's right ear. There it was. The mark. Faint, curved, unmistakable. Jonas blinked hard, swallowed once. "Caleb?" The boy stared at him. Something flickered behind his eyes. Confusion, recognition, fear, hope, all tangled together. Then he said it. "Papa?" Jonas closed his eyes. A sound escaped him, something between a sob and a prayer. He pulled the boy into his arms and held him close, like he'd been drowning for years and finally reached the shore. The boy clung to him without question. From the porch, Evelyn stood watching, one hand pressed to her chest, the other wiping a tear she didn't realize had fallen. She smiled, small, shaky, like someone who had finally exhaled after holding her breath too long. Jonas looked back at her, still kneeling with his arms around the boy, and in his eyes was gratitude. But more than that, there was something beginning, something real. They returned to Black Hollow 2 days later. Jonas sat with Caleb sleeping against his side, one arm draped protectively around the boy. He hadn't let go since the farm. Evelyn held the reins. The town looked smaller than before, the buildings more crooked, but the house, their house, looked like it had waited for them. Inside, the fire was lit again. Jonas carried Caleb to the bedroom once meant for him, laid him down gently, brushed the hair from his forehead. "Welcome home, son," he whispered. Evelyn watched from the doorway. Quiet, hands clasped tight in front of her. Later, when the house was still, she stepped out onto the porch. Jonas joined her. They stood side by side in the cold. He broke the silence first. "You saved me," he said. She turned. "You were already halfway back. I just walked with you." He looked at her then. Really looked. "The day you came here," he said, "I didn't think I'd ever feel anything again. And now I feel too much." Evelyn swallowed. Her voice came soft. "I never meant to stay," she said, "but I don't want to leave." He took a slow step toward her. Then another. "I don't want you to," he said. There was no more space between them. He reached for her, gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing beneath her eye. "May I?" he asked. She nodded once, and he kissed her. Not out of obligation, not out of gratitude, but out of something slow and real, something that had grown in silence, in firelight, in shared hurt and healing. When they pulled apart, she leaned into his chest, and he rested his chin on her hair. They stayed there for a long while. Inside, Caleb slept. Outside, the wind blew softly through the trees. And in that small house at the edge of a forgotten town, a family began again, not by fate, but by choice. Love hadn't come like a flood. It had come like snow, quiet, persistent, and it stayed.